the next section, which is going to just be actually testing each individual function. Okay, so we want to test that our find user by ID works appropriately. So let's take a look. Our input is going to be an ID number, and then we want to find this method here that we're calling from the users repository is going to find a user with the ID. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first thing is it should be defined, we're passing, okay? That's just saying that the service exists, okay? So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna say find user by ID. That is the name of our function. And then we're gonna do a little description of what it should do. So it should find an existing user by their ID. All right, and then we're going to create the test case here. Okay, so as you can see here, I kind of went back to one of the articles to get a little bit more information about what's going on, and this kind of explains the testing module that's getting set up here and using the repository token and the provide and use class. Okay, we're using use value, but similar idea. Okay. So then we are going to kind of go ahead and look at some tests. So they are running the test to check if the user already exists. Okay. So it should return false if the user doesn't exist. And so we see that what they're doing is they are kind of defining the input that's going to happen to that function, right? They're then calling the function with that input, the new user email, and they are getting the results, and then they're saying that they expect the result to be fake, okay? They're also going to spy on that find one method that's being called, and that they are going to mock the value that comes out of it, and it's going to be undefined, okay? So they are mocking the actual database call here, and they're just saying that it's going to come back undefined, okay? So then they're testing if a user doesn't exist, right? If a user doesn't exist, what happens from the database is we get an undefined. Then they're testing that the rest of their function makes sense and returns false, okay? Our function is a little bit different, okay? We are passing in an ID, so I'm going to say const user ID is equal to, let's just say 1 to make it easy, all right? And then that is going to be our input. I'm just going to call it ID actually. And then I'm going to kind of mock our output too. So our output is going to be a user. So we're going to see the ID is going to be 1, right? Because we're finding 1. And then we're going to say our name, just going to use Callie Strauss Cup. And where am I getting this from? I'm getting this from the user entity, ID, name, email, username, password. Okay? So ID, name, email, Callie Strauss Cup at gmail.com. Username, C Strauss Cup, password, fake password. Okay, and also like this would actually be hashed coming out, and then I'm going to say that this is going to be a user. Okay, that's the class that's going to be of. All right, the next thing that we want to do, so we set up first our data that we're going to be using. Here, they're just hard coding false, which is fine because why make a variable for false when you could just put it there? But they have their input and then they have their output, okay? So we have our input and our output. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do this just spy on. So if you go and look at our user service, you can see that it's going to use the method find one by. So what we want to say is we want to say just spy on. Okay, and then we're going to say we're spying on the mock user repository that we're using. So they're actually getting their repository. They're not mocking it out here, whereas we are. So we're doing things a little bit differently. Okay. So we're spying on our mock user repository, which is here. So you can see that our find one by is just like a function and it doesn't do anything. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to say, all right, we're going to spy on the mock repository. We're going to spy on find one by, and then we are going to mock the return value that comes out of that function. Okay. And the return value that we're going to mock is user. Okay. So we're going to say that whenever we use in this test suite, we use that find one by method, it's just going to automatically return user. Okay, because again, we're not testing the database and the type ORM's methods, because those are Postgres and type ORM are heavily tested already. We're testing our code that's using them. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is actually call on that function, okay, that we're trying to test, find user by ID. So we're going to say const result is equal to await, and then we're going to say service, because that's what we named it up here, service dot find user by ID, okay, and then we're going to pass in our input, which is our ID, okay. And the next thing that we're going to say is we're going to say expect result to equal user. All right. So now we can run our test and see if it passes. All right, perfect. And now you can see that we have that the user service is defined and that find user by ID finds an existing user by their ID. Okay. Perfect. So you can see that here we don't have, so here they're also testing whether or not it exists or not, but we don't really have that here. We're just finding it. You'll see when we get to the other ones that that's where we do the throwing errors if it doesn't exist. We use like a catch, I think, to see whether or not it actually exists, or we see if it's defined or undefined, because it's going to be undefined, right? And if it's undefined, then we throw an error. Those are in a different service. I think they're in the auth service that's doing that. So the testing there will test that specific functionality. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some more test statements too. So we want to expect that mock user repository method find one by first to have been called. Okay. We want to make sure that we're actually calling that in here, right? So we want to make sure when we run this function, we pass an ID, that we're actually calling this method here. So let's run our test. And it still passes, so that worked, okay? Then the next thing that we can do is we want to make sure the mock user repository find one by method is called, and we're going to say to have been called with, okay, ID. So we want to make sure that the ID actually got passed in to that, and we failed, and let's go take a look why. Okay, you can see that when we call find one ID, we're actually passing ID into an object, and you can see that here that is what happened too. So we want to wrap that in an object and run. And now we pass, okay? So that is how we would go ahead and do spec testing for our user service. We're gonna go function or method by method of the service and write our test suite out, okay? This can get a little bit long and repetitive, but this is going to be helpful because now if I ever change this function and I run my test, the function's gonna fail if it doesn't work the same way. And other methods are relying on this method, so we don't want this method to change its behavior, okay? And this will help us identify what specific part is breaking as well and is not behaving as intended if we make changes to our code, versus when we end-to-end test, we don't know where the bug is, okay? All right. Next, let's go take a look at the next function. So our next function is find user by username, all right, which is going to be pretty similar. So I'm actually going to copy this test and I am going to paste it. So find user by username. It should find an existing user by their username. All right, so instead of ID, we're going to have username, and we're going to say cstoscope. And if you look at the function, we are once again using find one by, but we're finding it by the username instead. So the user should still pop out, okay? So we still want to spy on the mock user repository, the method find one by, and we want to return the user instead of returning anything else, okay? So the result then of find user by username, we're going to pass in the username here, okay? We expect the result to equal user. We still expect that. We expect that find one by has been called, and we expect that it's been called with the username. All right, let's run this test suite and see how it's going. Perfect. So find user by username should find an existing user by their username. Nice. All right, let's go on to the next one. All right, so this one's going to be pretty similar. So we're going to do find user by email. Okay. Once again, we're using find one by, and we're passing in email. So I should also be able to, so I'm going to kind of start closing these tests as I'm done with them. I should be able to copy and paste and then switch out the information. And you won't be able to do this every single time, but it saves us a little bit of time in the meantime. Okay, should find an existing user by their email. Okay, so let's switch username out here with email. And we are going to put in the correct email here. Now, if I put in the incorrect email here, it still is going to give me back this object because we're not actually doing it. We're not actually looking in our database and finding the email, okay? So it doesn't actually matter what I'm putting in there because we're mocking the return value regardless, okay? So that's just kind of something to note, that we're not testing type ORM and the user repository methods. We are testing our code, that it's calling the right functions, it's returning the right values, okay? And here we'll switch this out with email as well. All right, let's run our test suite. And yep, find user by email should find an existing user by their email. Okay, looking good. Let's keep going. So next we have create user. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit different. This time we're using the save method. We're passing in a user of type signupDTO, and then we are saving the user and returning. It should just return the user. So let's look up type ORM. What does save return? Clearly, I've looked this up before. An instance of the same object you pass to it, but with ID. Okay, so perfect. So let's go ahead and do it. And then we are going to say create user should add a new user. Well, we're going to say add a user to So it should return a user with an ID property. Should return the user object that is passed into the method with an ID property. Okay. Because again, we're testing this is the test to say what actually should happen, and so it should return a user object with an ID property, okay? We're not testing type ORM here, so we're not going to say whether or not it's saving it in our database or whatnot. All right, okay. So first we need to set up our inputs and outputs. So our input's going to be a user of type DTO. So I'm going to say const user. All right. And I am going to say it is as sign up DTO. All right. and I'm going to add what needs to happen. So I'm going to add, I believe it's name, say Callie Stoves Cup, and then it's email, Callie Stoves Cup at gmail.com, then it's username C Stoves Cup, then it's password. Let's just do fake password. Okay, so that's our input. Then our output is going to be const. So yeah, let's change this to sign up DTO. And then our user that is going to return is going to be all the same stuff except with ID added. Okay, now this password will be hashed before it goes in and out because that's what's happening earlier in the thing, but that does not matter because that's not what we're testing here. When we do get to the point where we're testing whether something is hashed, then that is what we'll look at. Okay, so then the next thing is we are going to spy again. We are going to spy on the mock user repository and the method save, and we want to mock the return value. And the return value that we want to do is user. Okay, so then we can go ahead and do const result is equal to await, and we're going to call the service dot create user function. We're going to pass in the sign up DTO. All right, and then we expect mock user repository. Nope. I'm going to start with the result. We're going to expect the result to equal user. Okay, so now that I have that test, I'm going to run my test suite before I add the others to have been called. All right, so that passes, that looks nice. So then I'm going to do the other one. So what I want to say is I want to expect that the mock user repository dot the method save has been called. Okay, the next thing that I expect is that the mock user repository save, it has been called with, and then let's take a look what's actually passed in, and what's passed in is the user in brackets. So I'm going to say sign up DTO, and I'm going to run the test suite and see what happens. We failed. All right, so we need to add it like that. All right, perfect. I'm curious too if I didn't need to do that and I could have just done sign up DTO like that. Let me try that instead. Okay, I like that better in terms of looking at it. Okay, so now we have create users. Let's try to squeeze in our last one before we end this video. So the next one is delete user. Okay, so we're going to be mocking delete. So I think I'll try to copy create user and see how we can do. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what type ORM, what does delete return? All right. Type ORM delete. Okay, well, I'm going to just pretend that it's for sure just responds with the user, and we will go from there. All right. So delete user. Let's see what's passed in. So we're passing in an ID, and then it deletes it. So it should return the user object that corresponds to the ID passed in. Okay, so we don't need a sign up DTO here. We are just passing in const ID equals 1. Okay, and then we are going to return the user. Okay, so I'm spying on not save this time. I'm spying on delete. Okay, and so I can type that. And then I'm going to call delete user. I'm going to call it with the ID. And I'm expecting the result to be user because that should be what it passed in. And I'm expecting it not saved to have been called. I'm expecting delete to have been called. And I'm expecting delete to have been called with the ID. Except let me go check. All right, we're just passing in the ID, not in brackets. All right, and now let's run our test suite. Perfect, all of our tests pass. All right, so we have successfully added spec tests to our user service. Now, could we make them better? Probably. For example, we could throw an error if things don't happen at this level and add those tests. I'm sure there are more unique and elegant ways to write the test that we did, but for now, I feel like we've made some good progress, and we will go ahead and move on to the next service in the next video.